Folks, this month is a big deal. This month is the 25th anniversary of Persona, and I'm gonna let you all in on a little secret. Persona is my favorite video game franchise. Yes, you heard correct. I know that might be a shock to some of you because about 70% of this channel is dedicated to fighting games, and then I'd say about 25% of the rest of it is dedicated to horror games. So you probably didn't expect to hear that my favorite video game franchise of all time is the most J of JRPGs. This dungeon-crawling Pokemon gotta catch 'em all school life simulator Frankenstein is the franchise I lose my mind over the most. So in honor of the series' 25th anniversary, I wanted to do something special, and I was actually thinking of doing a big retrospective of the entire series. Just one problem with that: I haven't played the entire series. Yes, like with many Persona fans, I actually started with the third game, and you know how with every game or movie or book that has a big enough fan base, if you experience one of the later installments first, someone is bound to tell you, oh, if you want the true experience, if you want the good stuff, then you have to go back to this earlier one. Yeah, that is rampant in the Persona fan base. When I started with Persona 3, all I heard was, oh, that's alright, but Persona 2 is much better. If you want to play a real Persona game, then play Persona 2. Both of them. Then when Persona 4 came out, all I heard was people saying, oh, Persona 4 is too mainstream. If you want something that feels more like a real Persona game, then play Persona 3. And I'll never forget when Persona 5 blew up and became the best-selling game Atlus ever put out. I actually heard people saying, oh, you like Persona 5? I guess that must be your first JRPG then. Yes, I'm sure the reason the game was met with such critical and commercial success was because everyone forgot what JRPGs were. You nailed it. I'm sure it wasn't because it was just a very well-made game. You're not so out of touch. It's the rest of video games who are wrong. Can you tell I've had a chip on my shoulder about this for a few years now? Well, you know what? If the entire Persona fandom is going to insist that I play the earlier games, then you can't get much earlier than the first game. Unless you count Shin Megami Tensei if. That joke was a very deep cut for the Shin Megami Tensei fans out there. I hope you enjoyed it. So today, on Thorgi Finally Plays, I'm going to delve into the game that started it all. I'm going to go back to the beginning and see where the mechanics, the lore, and the deep characters that I came to love so much all started as I played the first Persona game. And hate every second of it. I'm sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's just roll that intro. Okay, so if you've only played the later Persona games like I have, you probably have multiple questions just from looking at this footage alone, but before we unpack all that, let's get a little background on this franchise. The Shin Megami Tensei games were originally a spin-off of the Megami Tensei games, which was a very loose adaptation of a book of the same name that was all about a young man who created a computer program that let him summon out demons. He has to go on a quest to save his girlfriend, who turns out to be a goddess, which is where the name Megami Tensei, or Goddess Reborn, comes from. After making the Megami Tensei games, Atlus decided, hey, why not make a game that doesn't have to be tied directly to these books? So they created Shin Megami Tensei, which roughly translates to True Goddess Reborn. The original Shin Megami Tensei game featured a story about Japan being attacked by America in a nuclear strike, and now our heroes found themselves with demon summoning technology in a post-apocalyptic world. But then Atlus looked at that and said, oh hey, this demon summoning technology is pretty cool, there's a lot that we can do with that. Oh right, we already blew up the entire world in our story. So they created a spin-off game called Shin Megami Tensei If, where instead of making a story about the world being destroyed, it was a story about a high school being sucked into another dimension and the students having to survive using demon summoning technology. And in many ways, this was where the Persona games really started. Not only did it establish the tone of the Persona games, focusing on supernatural events in a high school rather than war and the destruction of the entire planet, but this was even the first game in the Persona universe. Yeah, I'm not going to get too into this, but while every Persona game features their own cast with their own story, so that way you can pick up any game and start wherever you want, they do all take place in the same world, which is unique for Shin Megami Tensei because after the second SMT game, pretty much all future games would go on to either be their own thing or just loosely tie into one or two other games. But all the Persona games exist in the same universe, as well as Catherine, Devil Summoner, and Shin Megami Tensei If. In fact, in the first Persona game, you can even find the protagonist of the If games as a student at your school who says they transferred here after some unfortunate events happened at their last school. This was actually some really cool world building. Persona 1 was released in 1996, and it was rare back then to see a game hint at connections to a completely different series. Now, for this video, I am playing the PSP remake that came out in 2009. I am playing this one as opposed to the original for a few reasons. The first being that the original PlayStation version of this game goes for a couple $100 today, whereas the PSP version can still be downloaded onto your Vita for just a couple bucks. Unless Sony tries to shut down the Vita store again, then, I don't know, learn to emulate it, I guess? Hey, if they're not gonna give you a way to buy this thing legally, what do you want me to say? But the other and more important reason why I'm sticking to the PSP version is because the original English translation of Persona was notoriously rough. First off, this game has two storylines, referred to as the Sebek route and the Snow Queen's Quest. And early on, you get to decide which storyline you're going to go down with different villains and more importantly, different party members being unlocked in each route. But yeah, that sounds like a lot translating. So instead, they only translated the Sebek route. Some people think this was done to save disk space, but no, if you hack the game, you find that the Snow Queen's Quest is still available. It's still on that disc. They just didn't translate it, so it still uses the Japanese alphabet, or at least it would if the English version included the symbols for the Japanese alphabet, which it doesn't, so instead it just pops up as a bunch of symbols because the game doesn't know what to do. However, it is still playable. You can still find that entire quest within this game. And on top of that, this game was translated at a time when a lot of companies thought, oh, nobody in America wants to play something set in Japan, so characters' names and appearances were drastically changed in a clunky attempt to localize it. But on the PSP remake, you get all the original content as well as the original characters untouched. The only thing that was really changed was the soundtrack, as the original composer, Shoji Meguro, redid it all to make it more in line with the music of Persona 3 and 4, and they did a great job. It fits right alongside the later games while still having its own identity. But most importantly, when it came to the gameplay, from what I understand, it was left mostly unchanged so that way you could get the experience of playing the original. For better and for worse. Mostly for worse. Almost completely for worse. But first, let's start with the story. Now, when I went into this game, I went in cold. I knew nothing about the splitting pathways, so I didn't go into this trying to reach any specific ending or planning out who I talk to and when. But man, I should have, because there are some things I wish I had known going into this. Okay, so the game begins with you and some of your other school friends testing out an urban legend that if you walk around the room saying Persona, then you'll see your future. The group of friends decide to test this, only to pass out and then be greeted by a mysterious masked man named Philemon. This mysterious figure gives them the power of personas, and when they wake up, they go to see their friend Maki, a fellow classmate of theirs who's been in the hospital for a while now with deteriorating health. While there, an earthquake hits, or so they think. But as soon as everything settles down, they find that the hospital has now turned into a labyrinth, cutting them off from their friend, and monsters are now overrunning the city. You talk to Maki's mother, who is working as an engineer for a company called Sebek, and the company's president has been running experiments to open up a portal to another world, and that's causing all the monsters to come through. Now, this is when the story splits, because you can either choose to follow Maki's mother and check out what's happening with Sebek, or you can investigate a mystery from your school's past. I went with the Sebek route because why would you not go with the Sebek route? Your sick friend is trapped in the hospital. Demons appear and cut you off from her. Then her mom says, this is the person responsible for the demons. Who on earth would not go to investigate that? I'll tell you who. All the cool characters. Yeah, as I said, which path you take decides who can join your party. The path to investigate Sebek is led by Nanjo, who is the rich kid who puts down everyone around him, while the Ice Queen path is led by Yukino, a former punk who straightened up and now uses her tough attitude to look after others. Guess which one I would rather have had on my team? Seriously, half the line out of Nanjo's mouth are him calling his teammates stupid. Even without playing Yuki's route, I can tell she's easily the better character. But there are multiple other characters who can be recruited on both routes. They include Masao, who fills the dumb but good-natured friend role of the group. Then there's Hidehiko, who is the cocky kid with a huge ego who thinks he's the leader. Also, his nickname is Brown, which is appropriate since he's a total piece of There's Eriko, an aspiring model and fashion designer, and Yuka, who is kind of the stereotypical popular trend-chasing girl who is mostly focused on herself. Or at least that's what the descriptions online say about her. I don't really know because, as I said, you can recruit all these characters on both routes, but you can only recruit characters until your party is full. I was unaware of that, and I just started recruiting characters as soon as they became available because why would you not do that? So I got Nanjo, Maki showed back up, then I got Masao and Hidehiko, and that was it. I was stuck with them throughout the rest of the game as everyone else just decided, nah, you got this. I mean, you got the rich snob, the dumb guy, the sick girl, the egomaniac. That's a full party right there. Who else could you possibly need? Now, I know so far I've been coming off a bit negative. Okay, maybe a lot negative. But I actually do enjoy some stuff about this game. But in order to go over it, I will be getting a little spoilery, so you've been warned. After going to Civic, you and your friends find yourselves sucked into an alternate dimension, a mirror world to your own, and as you start exploring the city, you'll see characters you knew from your world, but now their lives are completely different. And this is where the game really started to shine. This is when it began to intrigue me, when it actually got to delve into these characters. Looking at this game in 2021, comparing it to modern day video games, this character work is pretty decent, it's just okay. But when you look at thinking about other games from 1996, it's actually really impressive. You meet this one girl from your old school who was gifted a mirror that granted her every wish, and she uses it to go mad with power, torturing people to make herself a queen who everyone has to praise, and when you finally confront her about, she reveals she's not being mind controlled, she's not under some master villain spell. No, this girl who you always thought was your friend secretly hated you for always getting all the attention and everyone thinking you were better than her. And when she was given the opportunity to finally be in the spotlight with this new power, it drove her mad. The mirror didn't make her evil, it was just her own feelings of insecurity. And the big reveal at the end of the game, listen, I'm gonna save this one for your own playthrough because even with the spoiler warning in effect, it is too big for me to give away. But at the end of the game, you learn some very personal stuff about one of your party members. And it is some deep, raw nerves being exposed to the world. And that is something that the Persona games always did well. They're not afraid to address, hey, the world is messed up, and people are messed up. We all have difficult stuff that weighs on us, and sometimes that's too much to deal with. I know that right now I'm a grown adult, but when I was a teenager, it was rare to see anything out there that actually had that message, that kind of addressed the fact that life just sucks sometimes, and it's natural to be overwhelmed by it. And when you're a teenager, that's the time in your life when I feel like you need to hear that message the most. And this is a game that is aimed at teenagers. So if I had played this at that time in my life, I probably would have been blown away by it. Especially because few other games at that time really tackled deep, real personal stuff like that, and I can see how this helped to establish the path that a lot of the later Persona games would follow. In fact, speaking of that, another thing that I loved about the Persona games is how they always start a band of ragtag characters who grew close over the journey, and even though I will admit I didn't really like any of the characters in my party, you do actually get to watch them grow closer, and I can't lie, I felt a little something at the end of all this. I mean, it's not perfect, it's not as good as how the characters bonded in the later games, but it is decent. Watching Nanjo soften up, watching Hidehiko have to cop to his own insecurities. Again, today, that's kind of basic, but back in the mid-90s, this was some pretty strong stuff. Especially considering that your party is almost completely customizable. Normally, when you have optional characters in an RPG, they never really do anything that important in the cutscenes or interact much with your core party members. they always feel like they were just tacked on, like they were afterthoughts. But when I found out how many characters are optional, I was blown away because I had no idea they weren't supposed to be there. They feel perfectly natural in every scene, and it boggled my mind to think about how much dialogue they had to write if every scene could play out 4 or 5 different ways depending on who is in your party. I mean, heck, there is a character who can't even join your team until 2/3 of the way through it. That is wild to me that the game could ask you to keep your party short by 1 member for that long just to reward you with a surprise final party member that late into the game. That is crazy, and it's something that I miss from early RPGs. It's something that I wish would come back. I wish more games were willing to have optional party members. And these splitting paths and these optional characters, it all reinforces another theme of the Persona games, that your choices matter. That your choices shape the story, which is another thing that I love about the Persona games. In later games, they would add in the social links, where your choices actually change how close you grow with other characters, which provide you with additional buffs. And while this game doesn't have anything quite like that, if you've played any of the modern Persona games, then you know that you do have the good ending, the bad ending, and sometimes even the true ending. And all that started here. Each path has multiple endings, and again, I tried to go into this blind. I didn't know there was going to be multiple endings until the very end, and man, am I happy that I somehow fell ass backwards into all the right choices. There are about 2 or 3 decisions that you have to make throughout the game that decide if you get to go on to the final dungeon and get the good ending. But then there's about 4 or 5 other decisions that you have to make that decide whether or not you unlock the party's ultimate personas. And somehow, not using a guide, not even knowing this was going to be a thing, I just happened to get all those choices correct. I don't know if the choices are easy or if I just somehow stumbled through this game like Mr. Magoo going through a construction site and managed to find the best ending. But I am so happy that I did get that best ending, because if I didn't, then that means I would have been forced to play this game again, and I cannot think of anything I would rather do less. Okay, yeah, I've held off on this long enough. Time to talk about the gameplay. As you can probably tell from everything I have said about the story, there is a ton of replayability here. There's totally different storylines to follow, totally different characters to recruit that change the dialogue around. There's so many reasons to come back and play this game again. The only thing that really discourages you from returning to it is the fact that this game plays like a garbage barge that is slowly sinking into the Hudson. Let's start with actually exploring the world. You have the overworld map, and whenever you go into a location or a dungeon, it takes this first-person perspective that was pretty common for dungeon crawlers at the time. And when it comes to these dungeons, I don't know if I have ever been in a dungeon that felt so barren. There are tons of twists and turns in these dungeons that lead you down dead ends, but you can always see the dead end coming up on your map long before you hit it. So I kept thinking, oh, well, some of these dead ends probably have treasures or something hidden in them. Nope, treasures are only available in rooms. If you see a dead end on the map, that's just a dead end. So then what's the point of letting me know on the map that it's a dead end long before I get to it? Why would you tell me before I could turn down a corner that there was no reason to turn down that corner unless there was occasionally a reason to turn down that corner? It just feels poorly designed, like they create a maze, but you could tell by looking at your map what was the correct direction to go fairly easily, so the only reason to steer off that path was if they gave you a reason to explore. But then they forgot to give you a reason to explore. Oh, and by the way, I mentioned finding treasures. Yes, there are treasures in the dungeons. And I'd say about 75% of the treasures you find are just booby traps. That's all. It's definitely above 50%, I know that for sure. So I'm telling you right now, if more than half the treasure chests that you run into in this game are just going to damage you and give you nothing in return, eventually there's gonna come a point where you just don't want to open up treasure chests. This is a dungeon crawler where I didn't want to open up treasure. How do you accomplish that? And as for the overworld map, it's fairly small, and yet I still never had any idea where I was going. They would constantly tell you, oh, you need to go to the shrine, you need to go to the subway, you need to go to the mall. But the game would almost never tell you after that where that location was on the map. You don't know where it is, so you just end up wandering around like a lost tourist in your own home. But that's all forgivable, that's just annoyances. The real problem is that the enemy encounter rate is through the freaking roof. I constantly got into a fight, finished it, then took 2 steps, got into another fight, finished it, took 2 more steps, only to get into another fight. Between how confusing the overworld map is and these constant battles, sometimes it actually took me half an hour to get from one location to another. Well, are the fights fun at least? Honestly, most of the time they're okay. There's a unique mechanic where each character can attack in a certain range, so you have to think about how you want to position your party on the field. That's a pretty interesting mechanic. I'll give them some points for that. But you just get into so many fights that eventually my brain just went into full autopilot. It became so boring and repetitive. And what's crazy is there is so much variety to this combat. It seems like it should be impossible to be bored by this. In Persona games, you have multiple types of attacks, and villains will be weak to specific moves. And over the years, the Persona games have tinkered with these attacks until they got to a solid variety. Ice, fire, lightning, wind, maybe you'll get a nuclear or a physical attack here or there. But in this game, it feels like they were throwing every idea they had out there and nobody told them no. There's fire, ice, wind, electric, nuclear, earth, blast, gravity, expel, miracle, bless, prayer, death, curse, nerve, and occult type attacks, and those are just the spells. As for the physical attacks, every single type of weapon and every single type of firearm also count as their own brand of attack with different weaknesses and strengths. How the hell are you supposed to learn all that? The answer is, you don't. You just attack until you win. Except for when the game decides to completely screw you over. Early on in the game, they'll start throwing enemies at you that are immune to all spells, but they'll be in the back row, so you can't hit them with your physical attacks until you clear out everyone in front of them. Now, in all fairness, most Persona games will give you enemies who are immune to all magic or physical attacks, but they tend to save that until the very end of the game because of how challenging that would make things. But here, halfway through the game, you'll run into monsters that can only be hit with physical attacks, and they're in the place that can't be reached by physical attacks. Think that sounds bad? Don't worry, it gets dumber. Let's talk about status effects. Yes, like many RPGs, there are status effects that your enemies can cast. And just like the elemental attacks, it feels like they just kept thinking up ideas and they never stopped. There's freeze, shock, panic, charm, bind, sleep, unlucky, mute, guilt, bind, fear, poison, paralyze, stone, sick, cloak, fury, berserk, and a few others that I never even ran into. Now, what do each of these status effects do? Who cares? Yes, they are all technically different from each other, but they each do basically the same 4 things, so there is no reason for there to be 20 of them. But what kills me about this, and I mean that quite literally, is that I have never seen an RPG where status effects had such a high chance of hitting. And a little history lesson for all the younger folks out there, but back in 1996, game devs didn't spend quite as much time as they do today testing everything to make sure the game was balanced. So you will run into a group of enemies that contain anywhere between 2 to 5 monsters that can all cast Charm, a mind control move, on your entire party all at once. And they will just do nothing but spam that one ability over and over. And status effects stack in this game. It will tell you how many turns your character is afflicted for, and each turn that number drops. Except for the turns when it doesn't for some reason, but I have no idea why that is. Sometimes the effect just doesn't feel like healing a turn. But that means that each turn the enemy can just keep hitting you with the same mind control stats effect, raising the number of how many turns it will take to heal, but because you have multiple enemies hitting your entire party each turn with that one move, you will just never heal. I died about 10 times playing this game, and only 2 of those deaths were due to me being overpowered by the enemy. The other 8 times were because I walked into a fight and just got stuck in an infinite loop. And let me tell you, I don't think there is a more degrading way to die than to just sit there for 10 minutes watching your own party members doing minuscule damage to themselves, knowing you have no way of stopping it. But if a party member dies, then at least the status effect ends, and then you can use an item to bring them back to life, and those items can be bought at any store for a fairly low price. So that's not so bad. Don't worry, it gets dumber. Are you ready for this? You're not ready for this. I can tell you're not ready for this because no one is ready for this, but here it comes. This might be the only game I have ever played where your items can miss. Not your offensive items. No, not the this cast a fireball on an enemy type items. No, those count as attacks. Attacks can miss. That makes sense. No, I mean your recovery items. Yes, each recovery item has a chance of missing, and I will never forget when my party was being wiped out in a fight, I took out an item to bring someone back to life, and the game just said, miss. I put the freaking controller down and had to just sit there and stare at the screen because I didn't even think something like that was possible. Your party member is dead. They aren't moving. They're lying there on the ground. How do you run over to them, bend down next to them, get out the life-saving potion, and then accidentally pour it on the ground? What cruel, unjust, unpaid, overworked game dev allowed such a thing to happen? Well, why don't you just run from the battles, you might be asking. Yeah, the odds of successfully running from a battle are microscopic. I tried it many times, and it almost never worked. Well, is there an item that allows you to run? Oh, you'd think that, wouldn't you? Most RPGs have that, right? Most RPGs have an item that lets you escape from battle, so this one should have one as well. And it does. Except it only has a 25% success rate. I am not kidding you. You have to spend money to buy an item so you can have a 1 in 4 chance of escaping. Can you imagine buying anything and they tell you right to your face that it only has a 1 in 4 chance of success? Ugh. And all this footage together is starting to give me a headache. Tylenol Extra Strength. Temporary relieves minor aches and pains due to the common cold, headaches, and backaches. Warning. There's only a 1 in 4 chance that this bottle will actually contain Tylenol Extra Strength. What the hell is the other 3 in 4 chance? Oh, this is much worse. There's essentially only one way that you can guarantee escaping from the enemies, and that is essentially to just game the system. In many Shin Megami Tensei games, you can recruit demons to your side by having a conversation with them. But that's not how it works in here. No, in here, if you want to recruit a demon, you have to answer a series of questions, and each answer can raise one of 4 different emotions. And if you raise their eagerness all the way up, then you can request a card from them. Is the card what lets you summon them? No, why would you think that? You have to collect multiple cards from different demons, and then take them to Igor, the recurring character from the Persona franchise who fuses together personas for you, and in this game he apparently does that with a giant 80s style cell phone and also stands up from behind his desk when he does it, and I am begging you as someone who played the later games first, please never do that again, it just looks really unnatural. And he will of course fuse these cards together into a persona that you can use. So rather than convincing a persona to join you, you have to convince multiple personas to give you their rookie cards, which you can then fuse into a persona. This sounds needlessly complex, but sometimes I didn't want to fuse these cards even if I needed a new persona, because if you have a demon's card and you engage in a conversation with that demon, they will immediately leave. So many times I just held on to demon cards just so I could actually have a roundabout way to run away from fights. I repeat, the only way I could make this combat manageable was if I essentially cheated the game so it let me escape. And speaking of getting those cards, I know people make jokes about how bizarre the negotiation system is in the Shin Megami Tensei franchise, but this is downright maddening. Each demon will have a personality type, and those personality types will respond to specific actions from your party. This is how it works in most of these games. If you played Persona 5, they brought it back for that one, so you're probably familiar with it. But you know how in that game, sometimes it might have been confusing which of the 3 dialogue options you had could work on each demon? Imagine if now you had 20 choices. You have a party of 5 people, and each of them have 4 things that they can do, and only one of them is correct for the demon you're trying to win over. Yeah, you have a 5% chance of guessing this right. I mentioned that I didn't use a guide for this game. That was for the story stuff. When it came to these negotiations, I caved and used a guide quick. Not that it helped me at all. You notice how most demons have multiple personality types? You might look at that and think, oh, so is this kind of like Pokemon when if something has multiple types, it has all of those types' weaknesses? No. If a demon has multiple types, it only obeys the rules of one of those types. And you have 0 way of telling which type that is. Even if you have a guide, it is still trial and error. Hold on, it gets dumber. Maybe it's got 2 types, so if you're using a guide, you know that one of 2 actions will work. You guess one, it doesn't work, so that means that the other choice was the correct one, right? No, because now since you guessed wrong, it's pissed off the demon, and what would have been the correct choice will now just piss it off more. So now you have to throw out some other option that is completely random to make them stop being mad enough in order for you to start giving them the correct choice. Meaning, you are going back to randomly picking one of 20 replies and hoping that it works. But maybe you selected the correct response, and now you're winning the demon over. Just keep saying that one thing over and over, and eventually they will join you. Unless they just suddenly decide they don't like hearing that one thing over and over. You can find the correct thing to say to the demon. Say it to them 3 times in a row, and they are loving it. They are almost won over. You just gotta say the correct thing one more time. So you say that choice for the 4th time, and now suddenly they hate it and you are dead to them. Or maybe they will randomly decide to ask you a follow-up question or ask for an item. And no matter how you respond to that, it will now raise a completely different stat other than their eagerness, the thing you need to recruit them. And now, this action that was previously raising their eagerness will now raise whatever the new stat is that was raised by this random question. And now you have to figure out how to stop that trait from raising so you can then go back to raising their eagerness. And unlike in later Persona games, every character in your party uses personas that they have to create, not just the protagonist. That means you are going to have to go through this process 5 times more than you would normally have to. But eventually you will manage to get some cards and you'll be able to fuse the personas together. But even after you get them, the personas act very differently from later games. In a way that is sometimes better, sometimes worse, but is always crazy. You know how in later Persona games, personas can learn multiple spells and each spell takes a certain amount of magical points to use? You know, like all magic spells in every video game. In Persona 1, each persona has an MP cost, meaning no matter what spell they cast, it will cost whatever that persona's MP cost is. Meaning there are some personas that have insane stage clearing attacks halfway through the game that cost next to nothing. Or all their spells stink and you will never financially recover from them. This is such a bizarre way to use your magic, but it gets even dumber. Yes, I know I've already said that a few times now, but it somehow continues to be true. Because you see, this game is so grind heavy. And don't get me wrong, a lot of early RPGs were grind heavy. You constantly found yourself underpowered in older RPGs. But what makes this unique is that the grind is built into the game. It's practically mandatory. Because you know how in later Persona games, when you get your Persona, they come with a collection of moves to begin with? In Persona 1, each Persona, after they're fused, only knows one move. And how do you get them to learn more? By leveling them up. How do you level them up? By using them. Over and over and over again. Meaning even if you work your ass off to get the new big shiny Persona that you want, they kinda suck for the first hour that you use them. You will grind to get the cards that you need to summon a Persona. Then you will grind until you are strong enough in order to summon the Persona. Then after you get that Persona, you need to grind the Persona so they can actually do something. And speaking of all that leveling up, say it with me everyone, it gets dumber. Yes, somehow they found a way to do it. Do you believe in whatever the opposite of a miracle is? So you need to grind to level up. That means you need to get into battles, so after you win, you'll gain experience points. Except not everyone on your team gets the same experience points. No, the experience points are divided up based on each character's performance. Do more damage, then you get more experience points. Cast bigger spells, then you get more experience points. I'll give you all 5 seconds to realize why that's a horrible idea. Yeah, this is essentially a the rich get richer style of leveling up. Your strongest character did the most damage, so they get the most experience points. But they don't need the most experience points, they're already my strongest character. I need to level up the weaker characters, so that way they can get better personas so they can actually start doing something. So, if you want to level up your weaker characters, that means you have to go into battle and then have all of your stronger characters just defend while your weaker character fights the enemies by themselves with their weak-ass persona that can't even do anything, which is why I need to level them up so I can get a better persona, but I can't do that because my persona sucks. This is the RPG version of late-stage capitalism. This game might as well tell you to pull yourself up by your bootstraps, except your boots suck and you need a job in order to buy better boots, but nobody will hire you because you have shitty boots. Well, maybe you just have the character level up without the persona by using regular attacks. You already know the answer to that. It gets dumber. First off, unlike every other Persona game, the persona that you can use isn't linked to your character's level. No, you level up 2 stats in this game. The one that determines your character level, and the one that determines the level of the persona that you can use. And how do you raise your persona level? By using your persona. If you want to get a stronger persona, you have to use the crappy persona that you currently have. But let's say you get so frustrated that you say, you know what, screw it, forget the persona, I'll just level up my character by attacking with my weapon. Guess what one item you can't buy in this game? Yes, you heard correct. You cannot buy weapons in this RPG. At least not your primary weapons. You can buy guns, but only way late into the game. As for your primary weapon, you can only get them as item drops from monsters or from trading in fully leveled up personas, which always takes a couple of hours of grinding and rarely will get you a weapon that is of any use to you by the time that you trade your persona in. I am not kidding you, there were several characters who joined my party and I didn't get a weapon for them for almost 10 hours after they joined. Meaning, they just had no weapon to use for all that time. I've said a few times now, okay, you have to judge this game for the time that came out, but I'm pretty sure even in 1996, putting out an RPG where you couldn't buy weapons was insane. Folks, I have done so many episodes of Thorgi Finally Plays, and in every single episode, I checked out a game that either had a lot of hype around it, or it was part of some legendary franchise, or it was important to the history of video games. And so far, I have loved every single game that I ended up checking out. Every single game that we have played so far for Thorgi Finally Plays left me with a big ol' smile on my face. So it was only a matter of time that I finally found one that I hated. And what kills me is that it's a game in my favorite franchise. Yeah, don't worry, the irony is not lost on me. And what really stings is, as I said, the story is interesting. I want to see what the other storyline is all about, but in order to do that, I would have to play this game again, and I'm sorry, I'm going to die someday. I don't have time to dedicate another 40 hours to something I know I will hate every minute of. Now, as I said, this is the 25th anniversary of Persona, and Atlus has said to celebrate, they have 6 Persona announcements to make. And while I'm sure that some of them are ports or another animated series or a mobile game, I don't think it's outside the realm of possibility to say that one of them could be a full-blown remake of an older game. And while I'm sure remaking Persona 3 or 4 or 2, either of them, would be the smarter move, this is the game that needs it. In fact, I don't even think this game needs to be remade like a more standard Persona game. The format of this story just wouldn't fit with the format of 3 or 4 or 5. This isn't a story that takes place over the course of a year. It just wouldn't work unless you changed every single thing about it. But I could see the team that made Persona 5 Strikers tackling this. I mean, those warrior games are all about taking on giant hordes of enemies, and the story of this game is that demons are overrunning the world. It would actually fit pretty well. I definitely want to see something done with this game. Something other than me playing it again. Well, that's a couple hours of my life that I'm never going to get back, but at least now I know that all those people who told me that I need to start with the first Persona game when I was playing the third one were completely full of crap. In fact, you know what, ladies and gentlemen, anybody out there who ever tells you, oh, you want to get into this franchise? Then you have to start at the beginning. Just go ahead and ignore them. 100%. I don't even care what they're talking about. You want to get into Street Fighter? Anybody that tells you to start playing Street Fighter 1 is completely insane. You want to get into Final Fantasy? If that person says that you can only play the new Final Fantasy if you have played every other Final Fantasy before it, that person is not your friend and they are actively trying to hurt you. Please cut them off from your life. Now, I will say the second game, both of them, is typically considered to be much, much better than this game. So I will continue my quest to play all the Persona games. I will end up playing Persona 2, both of them. I do want to experience all these games, but boy do I need a break after this one. So yeah, as I said, I still love Persona. It's still my favorite video game franchise of all time, so I am still going to continue celebrating Persona for the rest of this month. But we might not continue with a look at Persona 2. No, instead I think I have a couple of other things planned. So if you want to see all those videos, then make sure that you click that subscribe button, ring that bell, so that way you know whenever a new video goes up. And you can always follow me on Twitter at Thorgi's Arcade. And if you've played this game, let me know what you thought in the comments down below. Was I way off? Was I completely wrong? Was there something in here that I just didn't understand? Let me know all that and more down below. And also, you know what? If you're just a fan of the Persona franchise, let me know what your favorite installment is. Let's get some positivity going down there to counteract the rest of this video. What is your favorite Persona game? Let me know that down below. So thanks again for tuning in, everyone. Stay safe out there, and come back next time.